All right, folks, if you made it back to this, you made it this far, this is section 1.2. 1.2 is going to be very quick and very easy. I'm actually only going to go through one or two examples, period, because this is exactly what we just did. This is why we did the graphing investigation. This is why we just took things like the homework quiz that we just did. This should be very, very easy. If you follow along with your book, in your book with me, I'm on page 12 of the book. When I look through this, I'm looking through and I'm seeing every single thing that we just talked about already. I'm seeing things like horizontal translations are when you add or subtract in with the X. I'm seeing vertical translations are when you add or subtract at the end of an entire problem. I'm seeing things like reflecting over the X axis means that you put a negative out front. If you see reflecting over the Y axis, that means reflecting this way, or I'm sorry, a negative inside with the X, that means reflecting over the Y axis, which goes this way. So that's exactly what we just talked about, okay? If you continue on page 14, it even talks about horizontal stretches and horizontal shrinks. So as you read through this, you're gonna notice, or as you look through this, you're gonna understand that the more you go through, the more things become repetitive, okay? Now I will tell you the most challenging part of this entire thing is when we get into horizontal translations and we start to move things that way. But I'm just gonna go through and kind of talk about a couple of these problems. I'm just gonna pick a couple of random problems as we work through, and I'm going to show you exactly how I do this. Now, I already did this on the 1.1 video. All right, so if you watch the 1.1 video, then you really shouldn't have much to worry about. But I'm just kind of working my way through so that way you can see exactly what's supposed to be going on. Okay. All right, I paused it for a second, so sorry, but I wanted to pull the book up so that you could see what I was talking about. So if you remember just a second ago, I said that horizontal stretches and shrinks kind of make things a little bit weird. Everything else works exactly as you would expect it. A vertical stretch by a factor of 2 means you put 2 in front of everything and you just stretch it. A vertical shrink by a factor of 1/2 means that you multiply it by 1/2 and it gets half as big. If you look at page 14 of your book, you'll look right here where it talks about horizontal shrinking and horizontal stretching, okay? Now what I want you to think about, and I'm specifically talking about A right here. If you specifically think about a horizontal stretch and a horizontal shrink. If I stretch something and I'm making it stretch by 5 times itself, 5 times as big as it's supposed to be, that means that I'm going to have to do something with my values. If I think about taking something, and notice right here it says I want to shrink it by a factor of 3. If I want that thing to be 3 times smaller than it is, that's what you're going to put inside the X value. So if I want it to be 3 times smaller, remember a big number shrunk it. So if I want it to be 1/3 of the size that it was, that means it's shrinking. I'm going to use the reciprocal of that number, which is 3 inside that value. So if I want this thing to shrink by a factor of 3, remember big number means horizontal shrink. So shrink it by a factor of 3 means put a 3 in there. If I want it to stretch by a factor of 2, remember small number meant stretch. So if I want it to stretch by a value of 2, that means I'm going to put 1/2 in front of it, okay? So as you look right here, shrink it by a factor of 1/3 means put a 3 there, okay? So that's what I want you to think about. So you're just taking things and shrinking it, okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick another one of these. It doesn't really make a difference what when we pick, but I'm just going to find another value or another problem. Let me zoom out here for a second. But I'm just going to show you, I'm looking at the exercises. So I'm just going to pick an exercise. I'm going to use that exercise and I'm going to try to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay. So now if I look right here, it's specific. These are specifically saying, write a new function that represents the indicated transformation of the graph. So what it's doing is it's telling us that we have a specific function here. And then it wants us to reflect this function over the x-axis or reflect it over the y-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take one of these. It doesn't matter which one I take. I'll choose the even numbers probably because the odd numbers have answers in the back of your book that I want you to be checking. So if we just pick one of these, it doesn't matter. Let's look at number 14. If we look at number 14 and we pull this up into our whiteboard here, we say that what we want to do is we want this to be a reflection in the y-axis, which means a reflection over the y-axis. Reflections over the y-axis means anywhere I see an x right here, I am going to put a negative, okay? Now let me pause it just for a second here, just for 1 second. All right, sorry, my pen was dying on my tablet. All right, so if we look, oops, I'm not sharing with you. if we look here, if I want a reflection in the y-axis, I've already got some stuff in here. So I'm treating every single thing that's inside of this absolute value as my x value, okay? Every single thing that you see in there, I'm treating as my x value. So what I want, whoa, this is what happens with my, what is happening? So if I look at this part right here is my x value. If I want to reflect this over the y-axis, I'm going to put a negative in front of that whole thing. So I'm going to have the absolute value of negative, because that's where my reflection is going to pop in. And then I'm going to put all of this stuff in parentheses, close my absolute value, and put a +3 here. Now, the way that this works is you will then take that negative and distribute it all the way through. So I'm going to end up getting the absolute value of -2x plus 1 plus 3. Now, if you think about this in a normal way, think about this on a normal graph, whatever you're looking at. If I have a point, I don't care what the point looks like. I'm not graphing this thing, so it doesn't really make a difference to me. This thing right here means that my graph is going to move 1 unit to the right, right? So my graph will move 1 unit to the right. So since my graph will end up moving 1 unit to the right, that means it would end up being somewhere over here. If I want to reflect this over the y-axis, this point will then come over here, right? Because it's reflecting that way. In order to move it left 1 unit from the axis, it has to be a +1, which is exactly what's happening right here. That will make it shift so that way it's over the other side, okay? So this is what we would end up doing. The rest of the question asks me to use a graphing calculator to check my answer. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's a super good way for you to check to make sure that you're doing everything the right way, okay? Moving back into the book so that you can see it again. Moving back into the book here, we have a couple of different types of problems. Whoops. We have a couple of different types of problems. These ones are asking us to specifically write a function, I guess it's the same kind of thing, that does the same kind of thing that we were doing here. Now I told you that horizontal stretches and horizontal shrinks were kind of tricky. So let me do one of these so that way we can see it again. I'll zoom in and I'm gonna pull one of these questions off so that you can see it. Okay, so I'm gonna pull this one off so that way you can check it out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically work through only a horizontal stretch. It doesn't really ask me to do too much to it. So since it doesn't ask me to do too much to it, I'm not really going to worry too much about it. Okay. Now this is a little bit tricky because I'm only stretching the x values, and the x values are going to deal with this thing only. Okay. So the negative had to apply to everything. The negative had to apply to moving those points specifically and reflecting them over, because if it didn't reflect those points over, nothing would shift. But now when I'm dealing with horizontal stretch or horizontal stretch, remember stretch means it's smaller, right? Or no, I'm sorry. Stretch means it's bigger. So if stretch means that it's bigger, that means I have to put a small number in front of the x. So when I stretch this thing by a factor of 4, that really means I need to use the number 1/4 because I need it to be small number to stretch it. I'm going to apply that directly in front of the x right here. So it's going to be f of x equals the absolute value of 1/4. It only goes in front of the x on this one, plus 3. So this is specifically going to make it so that I only shift it with the x's. I make all of the x's grow. I don't care. Remember, it's not really going to move it too much. But that stretching is going to take place only with the x variable, okay? So I think that's probably enough for right now for you guys to kind of get yourselves moving. But you should be able to describe transformations. You should be able to write transformations, especially since this is only going what we went off of just a little bit ago, okay? So give this a shot, see what you can come up with. There are going to be some homework problems attached to Google Classroom. So go to Google Classroom, look at the problems I want you to try. They're all odd numbers. So that means that you should have answers to all of these in the back of your book. If you have questions for me, please make sure you shoot them my way so that I can talk you through them, and make sure that we understand what's going on. The next time you come into class, the next in-person day that you have with me, we are going to have a discussion over whatever you need to talk about. And then we are going to take a little brief homework quiz on this, okay? So it's going to be about 2 or 3 questions. And now be prepared because we're coming up to our first big quiz. We're a couple sections into Algebra 2, the real class. So once we get through 3 sections, we're going to have our first, mid-chapter quiz. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Be ready for it. Start studying these, start understanding what's going on with them so that way you can figure out how to work through these problems yourself. Okay, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Don't hesitate to talk to me so that way we can get it sorted out. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Good luck.